You might remember back in April, there was a really weird day on the stock market where the market took a huge sudden tumble, but it wasn't for any market-related reason. It may have stuck in your mind what happened that day back in April, because that was the day the stock market dove because of a tweet, a false tweet, which said that President Obama had been injured.
It all began about 1:07 this afternoon with this tweet from the Associated Press. Breaking. 2 explosions in the White House, and Barack Obama is injured. The message went to AP's 1.9 million Twitter followers and spread like a virus, retweeted almost 5,000 times within a minute. But it was a fake. AP's account had been hacked.
And it partly explains the unusual activity in the Dow.
The Dow began plunging and within 3 minutes dropped more than 140 points.
You looked around the floor, you saw people running, you saw people upset, not sure what was going on, just watching this market trade lower.
Automatic trading programs kicked in.
Human beings weren't making these trades. These were computers, algorithms designed to scan the headlines and find negative or positive words and then help companies profit on the results.
Minutes after that first message, AP's corporate account tweeted it was bogus and suspended the AP's Twitter page. The president's spokesman reassured the public.
And I can say that the president is fine. I was just with him.
The Syrian Electronic Army took credit for the hacking, as well as for hacking into CBS's 60 Minutes Twitter account over the weekend.
The Syrian Electronic Army. The Syrian Electronic Army took credit for that hack of the Associated Press Twitter feed back in April, which for a long and scary instant made people think that something terrible had happened at the White House, and which temporarily at least tanked the stock market that day. The Syrian Electronic Army is a group of hackers that we do not know that much about. We know they are pro-Syrian government. They are pro-Bashar al-Assad. They are said by U.S. officials to have close ties to the Syrian military, but they're anonymous and they're hackers and we don't know much about them. Their attack on the AP's Twitter account was on April 23rd. Less than a week later, it happened again. Same perpetrators, apparently, but this time they hacked the Twitter account of the Guardian newspaper. Then, about a week after that, the same hacker group went after The Onion. Seriously. Yes, America's beloved and brilliant satirical newspaper. When the Syrian hackers took over The Onion's Twitter account, The Onion responded as only they could. This was their headline in their follow-up article, quote, "Syrian Electronic Army has a little fun before inevitable upcoming deaths at hands of rebels." So it was the AP, it was the Guardian newspaper, it was the geniuses at The Onion. 10 days later, it was the Financial Times. When they hacked the Financial Times Twitter account, they used it to promote and link to a violent graphic video. In July, the same pro-Syrian government hacker group hit Reuters, again taking over the Reuters Twitter account, and this time posting political cartoons about the Syrian war. They were able to control Reuters' Twitter account for more than a half an hour, which is a long time for something like this. A month later, the same group reportedly hit the Washington Post and also CNN and also Time magazine. When it launched that last attack, the Syrian Electronic Army tweeted an image to show that it had taken over those media outlets' domain names. So between late April and mid-August, 4 months, this anonymous, unknown hacker group allied with the Syrian government successfully attacked and took over websites or Twitter accounts connected to the Associated Press and the Guardian and the Financial Times and Reuters and the Washington Post and CNN and Time magazine and, weirdest of all, The Onion. Today it happened again, and this one's a biggie, and it has been going on all day. Starting at about 3 o'clock Eastern time this afternoon, the New York Times website, nytimes.com, no longer worked on my internet machine. I say it that way because, weirdly, a friend working in northern New England, who I was emailing with about something at the time, said that he was still able to access the New York Times website. But in New York and in most places, nobody could get it. The New York Times quickly posted this message on their Facebook page, acknowledging that many people, most people even, were unable to access their website. They said, "Our initial assessment is the outage is most likely a result of a malicious external attack. In the meantime, we're continuing to publish key news reports. Here is our latest article from Syria, which is accessible to everyone." That link led to this still accessible piece of reporting on the potential for American military action against Syria. Now, all this was happening at around the time that people started tweeting that they were seeing this image. This is the Syrian Electronic Army's logo. People started tweeting that this image was popping up for them on their computer screens when they were trying unsuccessfully to refresh the broken New York Times website. And then it was not just the New York Times, but also the Huffington Post's British version, huffingtonpost.co.uk. Then the Syrian Electronic Army allegedly took over that domain for the Huffington Post site sometime this afternoon. They then took to Twitter to claim credit for their hacks today. Then they also apparently attacked Twitter itself, both in the U.S. and in the UK, only disrupting some service in kind of a minor way. But they did publicly let Twitter know that they had changed the firm's online information to show that Twitter now technically was owned by the Syrian Electronic Army. We owned you. Yeah, which is the kind of stunt that is so sophomoric. It's actually an insult to sophomores to call it that. We do not know who the Syrian Electronic Army is specifically, but they are pro-Syrian government hackers. They support the Syrian government. They support Bashar al-Assad. And they've been really effective at carrying out these mostly dumb but occasionally crippling attacks on the highest profile websites on the earth. Just moments ago, it was just a few minutes ago that the New York Times site came back online after being down all day long. Is this a freelancing effort by Assad's supporters? Or is this Syrian policy? Is this cyber warfare being waged by Syria's military at the direction of Syria's president? Is this one of the things that Syria feels it can do to lash out at the rest of the world as that country gets increasingly isolated and condemned among the nations of the world? Today, Syria's foreign minister warned at a press conference that if Western powers intervene in Syria, if Western powers attack the Syrian government and Syrian military, the country's response should not be underestimated. He said, quote, "We have the means to defend ourselves, and we will surprise everyone. We will defend ourselves. We will defend ourselves using all means available. I don't want to say more than that." Whether or not you think Syria's got anything that it can do that should worry the rest of the world, are they going to be attacked by another country? Are they going to be attacked by us? Is the U.S. military, with or without international allies, about to launch a military attack on that country? If you kind of take the binoculars off your face and turn them around the wrong way and just take the very short-sighted view of the very short-term discussion that's just happening just inside the Beltway, it really seems like that attack is about to happen. Before the New York Times website went down today, you could have seen that the main headline online there this afternoon, their main story on Syria was titled "Momentum Builds for Military Strike in Syria." At the Washington Post tonight, it's this: Obama administration lays groundwork for possible military strike against Syria. At CNN and the Fox News channel, it has apparently been very difficult to turn away from the pressing issue of critiquing the dance moves of Miley Cyrus. But even they have now moved to front page. Now, not the question of whether there will be a U.S. military attack on Syria, but when that attack will happen and what it will consist of. So in the short view, it's definitely going to happen. It's just a question of exactly when and what it's going to look like. If you take one click, though, toward a wider view, that reveals more of a debate and less of a certainty that this attack is going to happen, or at least that it should happen. When you see those weapons inspectors in Syria now, the ones who were shot at by snipers yesterday, when you see those weapons inspectors in Syria looking for proof, looking to see if there's evidence to substantiate these allegations about the use of chemical weapons, those weapons inspectors, their most famous predecessor is, of course, this man, Hans Blix. He ran the UN's nuclear agency for 16 years. Then he was the UN's chief weapons inspector for Iraq in the 3 years leading up to when we invaded back in 2003. You'll recall that war in Iraq was started under the false pretense that Iraq had chemical weapons and biological weapons and soon-to-be nuclear weapons, and that's why the U.S. had to invade. Those allegations were made with dead 100% certainty by U.S. officials in 2002 and 2003. And even though Hans Blix and his team were supposed to be the inspectors charged with looking for proof of those allegations, the U.S. at the time decided we could not wait for them. We could not wait for them to actually get the proof. We were so sure that we would go ahead on our own terms. Screw the UN. We told the UN weapons inspectors back then to get out, to stop their work and leave. The U.S. government told them to get out of the way so we could go ahead and start bombing, because our government did not need their stinking proof. Our government was so sure they were right. And, of course, our government was wrong. Turns out. Should have stuck with the weapons inspectors. Well, today, with the weapons inspectors still on the ground inside Syria, and these threats that U.S. military action might start anyway, maybe even while the weapons inspectors are still in that country. Today, good old Hans Blix is trying to make sure that the lessons from the last time this happened are not forgotten. Asked today whether he thinks chemical weapons use has been proven, he's not shy about it. He says the indications are certainly in the direction of the use of chemical weapons. Also, the circumstantial evidence points to the Assad regime carrying out the use of such weapons. However, since the Western powers have asked for UN inspections, and Syria has accepted, and the inspectors have been put in the field, we all should wait to see the report of the inspectors before action is taken. He says, as we have seen before, the political dynamics are running ahead of due process. He was then asked if he feels like this is an echo of the Iraq war issue under President George W. Bush. He says, in a way, yes. Then, too, the Americans and their allies asked for inspections. Then, too, they said, forget it. We have enough evidence on our own to act. We are the world police. Only last March, he says, the West was satisfied with inspections concerning the use of chemical weapons. Why can't they wait again now? In 1 month, when you have accurate tissue samples, we will know for sure exactly which kind of chemical weapons have been used and who possesses such weapons. He's then asked about the difference between President Obama on this issue and what happened in the lead up to the Iraq war. Hans Blix says that President Obama some time ago talked about international legality. I was heartened by that. But now I'm afraid the politics of the moment are pushing him in a direction we have seen before in the United States. Quote, if the aim is to stop the breach of international law, and to keep the lid on others with chemical weapons, military action without first waiting for the UN inspector report is not the way to go about it. If you have ever wondered why it is that presidents age so fast while they are in office, it is probably decision points like this. Who should respond to this? How long should anyone wait on the UN for a truly international response? If the U.S. doesn't want to wait that long, then what can be gained by not waiting and going ahead alone? Why rush? What targets do you hit if you are going to hit them? If the goal is not to just full-on join the war to depose that government inside that country, then when do you know you should stop hitting those targets? When do you know you've accomplished your objectives? And since you can't really hit chemical weapons facilities themselves without, dispersing chemical weapons, or at least leaving them vulnerable to being taken by anybody, what if the government we've decided to bomb responds to us bombing them by turning to more chemical weapons attacks on their own civilians? This is a hard decision. This is a hard decision for any president. This is a hard decision particularly for a president like the one we've got right now, who professes a belief and who has demonstrated such a belief in multilateral action and to the United States being a leader among nations, not a leader despite nations, but a leader among nations who believes in international action. This is a hard decision. Fortunately, there's an app for that. It's an old one, but it still works great. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution of the United States enumerates the powers that are given in our country to Congress. To Congress specifically, not the president, but Congress. And the 11th clause of that section says, the Congress shall have the power to declare war. Everyone will try to say that the kind of military action being considered against Syria right now is technically not war. It just looks that way. It's the kind of limited, temporary military action that presidents have been taking on their own recognizance for decades now. And if you want to argue precedent, that is true. That is how we have dealt with issues like this in the past. If you want to argue the Constitution, frankly, it is supposed to be Congress. Unless somebody is attacking America, somebody is attacking us, and the president needs to take immediate action to defend us with no time to consult Congress. It's supposed to be Congress who makes the decision about using force. And then once the decision is made, it's the president as commander-in-chief who commands the U.S. forces who have been committed to the fight, by the decision made by Congress. That is not the way it works now, most times. But that is the good idea that the founders of our country had for how it ought to work. Might those guys have been onto something when they came up with that system? In this hard decision on Syria, might the country not benefit right now from a rollicking debate on what to do here, on what's right and what's prudent and what is in keeping with our values and our obligations and, frankly, our means to make a difference? Today, a congressman who represents a district that has one of the largest concentrations of active duty and retired military service members in the country spearheaded a letter to President Obama calling on him to please talk to Congress about this issue. Dear Mr. President, we strongly urge you to consult and receive authorization from Congress before ordering the use of U.S. military force in Syria. While the founders wisely gave the president the authority to act in emergencies, they foresaw the need to ensure public debate and the active engagement of Congress prior to committing U.S. military assets. Engaging our military in Syria when no direct threat to the U.S. exists and without prior congressional authorization would violate the separation of powers that is clearly delineated in our Constitution. If you deem that military action in Syria is necessary, Congress can reconvene at your request. We stand ready to come back into session, consider the facts before us, and share the burden of decisions made regarding U.S. involvement in the quickly escalating Syrian conflict. Sincerely, 37 members of Congress, at least as of a few hours ago, maybe more by now. Joining us now is Congressman Scott Ridgell. He's a Republican of Virginia. He's a member of the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman Ridgell, it's really good to have you with us tonight. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Rachel. I listened to your introduction. I think you framed the issue well, and it's really a serious matter.
I think, thank you for saying that. I think your constitutional argument in your letter is sound. You could tell from my introduction that I agree with it. I disagree with you on one point where you say that Congress stands ready to come back into session and share the burden of decisions on this issue. I know that you say you are and your co-signers must be, but as a whole, do you really think Congress stands ready and able to do that right now?
Well, I believe that deep inside each member of Congress, regardless of party, is the desire to do the right thing. The right thing in this case is, should the president call us into session, if he really believes that the use of force is both warranted and imminent, as I expressed in the letter, signed and joined by Republicans and Democrats, now over 40, and we'll have, I believe, more tomorrow, then he has a duty to call us into session, give us, say, for example, 24 hours to come back. There are members of Congress around the world on different trips. Some are at home, of course. But that's enough time to get here. This is what we do, Rachel. There's no more important issue before the American people than the use of American force and putting our young folks into harm's way. As you mentioned, I have the privilege of representing a district that has the highest concentration of men and women in uniform in the country. We'd be here. The president should come forth and lay out the most compelling case, present the facts as much as he can, and of course respecting the intelligence sources that we have, and then give us a relatively short time to deliberate, and then to, should it be warranted, provide statutory authority. This is the moral foundation upon which he could proceed, and if the facts are there, he'd have the support of the American people.
There's no reason that the president himself has to call Congress back. Congress could reconvene of its own authority. Obviously, this is an independent responsibility of Congress to make its own assessment on these terms. Do you think that's possible, and would it make a difference who called for Congress to take such an action?
Well, it's theoretically possible that each respective leader of each body, Speaker Boehner, could call us back into session. That's his prerogative. I'm sure the same is true of Majority Leader Senator Reid. Now, it's very clear, though, that the president has that authority. It's clearly delineated in our Constitution. And again, if he believes that the facts warrant intervention, that's a serious matter. He'd really have to lay forth the strategic objective. Simply punishing the Assad regime, however heinous it is, you could characterize it easily as criminal. Punishment is not in and of itself a strategic objective.
In terms of the way to move forward here, obviously, members of your party, particularly the conservative wing of your party, has been not friendly to the idea that the United Nations should constrain U.S. action in any way. And us working with the United Nations, even collaboratively, is something that has been troubling to a lot of Republicans. In this case, when I read those comments from Hans Blix today, when he's obviously making this very inflammatory comparison to what happened a decade ago in the lead up to the war in Iraq, I am compelled by his argument that the UN weapons inspectors are there. They have at least limited access to that site. There's no reason not to wait for their definitive proof. If for no other reason, then it might bring more international allies on board, maybe even enough to get UN authorization for some sort of international action. What's your reaction to that?
Well, their specific purpose is to determine whether chemical weapons were used or not. I think the evidence is already pretty clear, and they're going to come out with the affirmative, that is, that they were used. Their purpose is not to identify or determine who or what entity used the weapons. Right. So I really believe that the president's got to lay forth before the American people. And one thing that I would maybe differ with you just a little bit in your introduction. You referenced much of the need to go before the international community. There's a good reason to do that. But first and foremost, the moral foundation upon which a commander-in-chief can exercise force, in this case where a threat is not imminent and we've not been attacked, is really to go before the American people through their elected representatives. You know, when the American people are given good information, they'll make good decisions. I found this to be true in my district. So I'm really hopeful. I'm optimistic. Perhaps it's naivete or idealism. That's all right. We're going to keep this fight to encourage the president to call us into session should he think that force is needed.
Congressman Scott Ridgell, it is a particular pleasure for me when Republican elected officials agree to come on this show. A rare pleasure, unfortunately. But thank you so much for your time tonight, sir. It's good luck to you. Good luck to you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's the idea that Congress should play a role here goes contrary to the widespread feeling, I would say, that this Congress is more of a show horse than a workhorse and is not capable of debating anything well. That said, this is exactly what Congress is for, debating the use of force. And it's supposed to be their call. Totally nonpartisan issue, but this is this is the kind of thing you're supposed to expect your Congress to be able to rise to. We shall see. All right, lots ahead tonight, including some very not usual suspects turning out on a big civil rights issue. Stay tuned.